Metabolism expert Dr. Ben Bickman explains that fat cells in our bodies don't expand simply because we eat too many calories. Instead, they grow when insulin levels rise. In his lab at BYU, Dr. Bickman and his students grow fat cells in petri dishes. These cells are surrounded by a nutrient-rich medium packed with calories, everything they could possibly need. And yet, they remain tiny. The moment insulin is added, however, the fat cells begin to swell. Within 6 hours, they contain visible lipid droplets, and they continue to grow as insulin remains present. This demonstrates a key point. Insulin, not just calories, drives fat storage. Clinical evidence supports this as well, showing that insulin directly affects fat cell growth and weight gain. In other words, obesity is primarily hormonal, not just behavioral. That's why relying only on calorie restriction or intense workouts is often ineffective. Real progress in weight loss comes from strategies that help lower insulin levels. One striking example comes from patients with type 1 diabetes. A dangerous eating disorder called diabulimia occurs when individuals deliberately underdose their insulin to stay thin. Even if they eat freely, they remain lean because their insulin is too low to trigger fat storage. Of course, this comes at a deadly cost, ketoacidosis and other complications, but it clearly proves that insulin is the gatekeeper of fat. The insulin trick. While fasting is often seen as one of the most effective metabolic tools, Dr. Bickman notes that it isn't practical or sustainable for everyone. Instead, he proposes a simpler approach he calls the insulin trick. The idea is to manage insulin through smart eating habits, especially in the morning when hormonal changes strongly influence metabolism. Morning insulin resistance. Most people don't realize that insulin is already elevated upon waking, a natural process called the dawn effect. A few hours before waking, cortisol rises, prompting the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream. As a result, the body becomes temporarily more insulin resistant in the early morning. This means the first 2 hours after waking are the worst time to eat if your goal is fat loss. Food consumed during this window is more likely to be stored as fat rather than used for energy. Instead of rushing to breakfast, Dr. Bickman recommends delaying your first meal. Use that natural burst of morning energy for planning, light activity, or focused work. When you do eat, choose a balanced, low-carb breakfast. Avoid the sugary, starch-heavy foods that dominate modern breakfast culture. Cortisol, sleep, and cravings. Cortisol is closely tied to your circadian rhythm. Poor sleep raises morning cortisol levels 2 to 3-fold, which in turn elevates insulin. The result? More hunger, stronger cravings, especially for carbs, and less self-control. Cortisol also acts on the brain, increasing proteins that stimulate appetite, such as NPY and AGRP, while reducing satiety signals from leptin. At the same time, it boosts dopamine in the reward centers, making high-carb, high-calorie foods even more tempting. Coffee and insulin. Another surprising factor is caffeine. Studies show that caffeine, especially when combined with carbohydrates, significantly increases insulin secretion. In the morning, when cortisol is already high, drinking coffee can cause a sharp insulin spike, even on an empty stomach. This doesn't mean coffee must be eliminated, but delaying it until later in the day can help keep hormones balanced and protect metabolic health. The takeaway: Dr. Bickman's insulin trick isn't about extreme dieting or punishing workouts. It's about working with your body's natural hormonal rhythms, especially in the morning, so that fat loss becomes easier and more sustainable. By adjusting the timing of meals, choosing smarter breakfasts, prioritizing sleep, and delaying coffee, you set your metabolism up for success. The key is consistency, not drastic measures. In short, get the morning right, and the rest of the day follows.